The power flickered twice before dying completely, plunging the Connecticut estate into darkness. Chen pressed her hand against the kitchen counter, feeling the familiar tremor in her fingers that meant her blood sugar was dropping. 8 months pregnant, and the glucose monitor on her arm was screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. "Marcus," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need my insulin. The backup generator isn't working." Her husband appeared in the doorway, his phone glowing blue against his face. Marcus Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies, 42 years old and worth $200 million, looked at his pregnant wife the way someone might look at a broken appliance, annoyed at the inconvenience. "Can it wait? I'm on a conference call with Tokyo. This merger won't negotiate itself. My insulin is in the medical fridge. Without power, it'll be ruined in a few hours. I need you to drive to the pharmacy before the ice storm gets worse." Sarah's hand moved to her swollen belly, where their daughter had been kicking restlessly for the past hour, as if sensing her mother's distress. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus glanced toward the window where freezing rain was already coating everything in a deadly glaze. "Sarah, be reasonable. The roads are a nightmare. You have enough insulin to last until tomorrow when this passes. I have 1 vial. That's barely enough for tonight, and the storm is supposed to last 3 days." She tried to keep the desperation out of her voice, tried to remember the woman she'd been 4 years ago when Marcus had pursued her with flowers and promises. Before the pregnancy had made her dependent. Before his pharmaceutical sales manager, Victoria, had started accompanying him on every business trip. Then ration it. He turned back toward his study. "I'm not risking my life driving in this weather for something that's not an emergency. Marcus, I'm diabetic and pregnant. This is an emergency." He paused, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flicker across his face. Not concern, calculation. "You always do this. You always make everything about you and your needs. Do you have any idea how much is riding on this Tokyo deal? How many people are depending on me? I'm depending on you. Your daughter is depending on you. And you'll be fine." His voice had that edge now, the one that meant the discussion was over. "You're being dramatic, Sarah. It's what you do best lately." The phone in his hand lit up with a text. Sarah caught a glimpse of the name before he angled it away, Victoria. Even now, even with his pregnant wife begging for life-saving medication, he was texting her. "I'm calling my brother," Sarah said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Daniel is 4 hours away in Boston. By the time he gets here, if he can even make it through this storm, it'll be tomorrow anyway. You're proving my point about being overdramatic." He walked away, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floors of the house Sarah had never wanted, in the town where she knew no one, an hour from the city where all their friends lived. Marcus had insisted on this place, isolated, private, perfect for a man who valued control above all else. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and texted her brother, "Need help. Marcus won't get my insulin. Storm getting bad. I'm scared." The reply came within seconds, "I'm coming. Don't let your levels drop below 80. I'm leaving now." Daniel Chen was a cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, brilliant and protective, the only family Sarah had left since their parents died 3 years ago in a car accident. He'd never liked Marcus, had argued against the marriage, had pointed out red flags that Sarah had been too in love to see. She checked her glucose monitor, 95. Still safe, but dropping. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah whispered, "I know, sweetheart. Mama's trying." The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows. Through the glass, Sarah could see ice forming on the bare tree branches, turning the world into something beautiful and deadly. The weather report on her phone showed a massive storm system stalled over the northeast, the worst ice storm in 20 years, they were calling it. Road closures spreading like a disease across the map. She opened the medical fridge, staring at the single vial of insulin that would have to last. In normal circumstances, she could stretch it. But pregnancy had made her insulin needs unpredictable, and stress made everything worse. Right now, her body was burning through glucose like a furnace. Sarah heard Marcus's voice from his study, smooth and charming in the way he never spoke to her anymore. "Victoria, I understand your concern, but the Chen contract is solid. Sarah's brother might be a cardiologist, but that doesn't give him any influence over." A pause. "No, she doesn't know about her family's pharmaceutical holdings. I told you, she's completely disconnected from all that." Sarah froze. "What pharmaceutical holdings?" She moved closer to the study door, her heart pounding. "Her grandfather built Chen Pharmaceuticals into a billion-dollar empire before he died," Marcus continued, his voice carrying that edge of satisfaction he got when closing a deal. "The company's been in trust since her parents died, managed by the board. Sarah never wanted anything to do with the family business. She thinks she's just a middle-class girl who married up." He laughed. "Can you imagine? She's sitting on a fortune and doesn't even know it." The room tilted. Sarah gripped the doorframe, feeling the baby shift inside her as if responding to her mother's shock. "That's why I married her, Victoria. Access to Chen Pharmaceuticals through the family connection. Once the baby's born, I'll initiate the divorce, claim parental rights, and position myself to influence the trust. Sarah's too soft to fight me, she'll give me whatever I want to avoid conflict." His voice dropped lower. "And then you and I can finally be together properly. No more sneaking around. No more pretending I care about a wife who let herself become a needy, overweight burden." Sarah's hand moved to her belly, to the weight she'd gained creating life, and felt something inside her chest crack and reform into something harder. "I should go," Marcus said. "The power's out and Sarah's making a fuss about her insulin. I'll deal with it. See you when the storm passes, sweetheart." Sarah moved silently back to the kitchen, her mind racing. Chen Pharmaceuticals. Her grandfather's company. She'd been 7 when he died, remembered him as a kind man who smelled like peppermint and told stories about coming to America with nothing. Her parents had managed the company, but they'd never pushed Sarah toward the business. When they died, she'd been so consumed by grief that she'd ignored the lawyers, the paperwork, the trust documents she'd signed without reading. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel, roads are already bad. I'm trying." "Hold on, Sarah. Don't let him see you're scared. Too late for that. But maybe not too late for something else." She checked her glucose, 87. Dropping faster now. The baby was quiet suddenly, conserved energy in the way fetuses do when the mother's body is under stress. Sarah knew enough about pregnancy and diabetes to know that was a bad sign. Marcus emerged from his study, already dressed in his cashmere overcoat. "I'm going out. You said the roads were too dangerous. I have chains on the Mercedes. I'll be fine." He didn't meet her eyes. "Victoria's stranded at the office. I need to make sure she gets home safely." "Of course." Victoria was worth risking his life for. Sarah, carrying his child, was not. "What about my insulin?" "There's a vial in the fridge. You'll be fine until morning." He pulled on his leather gloves, expensive and smooth. "Try not to be so needy, Sarah. It's exhausting." The door opened, bringing in a blast of frigid air and ice. Then he was gone, the Mercedes's engine roaring to life, taillights disappearing into the storm. Sarah stood alone in the dark house, feeling the baby flutter weakly inside her. Her glucose monitor showed 82. The insulin in the fridge might last through tonight if she was careful. But 3 days? Without power to keep the medication cold, without backup supplies, without help? She thought about what Marcus had said. About Chen Pharmaceuticals. About the fortune she supposedly had. About the divorce he was planning. Her phone rang. Daniel's face filled the screen, concerned and furious. "I heard him," he said without preamble. "I called your phone 20 minutes ago and you must have answered it by accident. It was in your pocket or on the counter." Sarah, I heard everything he said to Victoria. You heard? Every word. Daniel's voice was tight with controlled rage. Sarah, listen to me. You need to know some things about your inheritance. Things Mom and Dad were going to tell you when you turned 30, but... His voice cracked. They died before they could. Sarah's glucose monitor buzzed, 78. She injected a small amount of insulin, watching the precious liquid disappear into her body. Tell me. Chen Pharmaceuticals isn't just successful. It's revolutionary. Grandfather's patents on insulin production methods are worth billions. The company supplies 40% of the insulin used in North America. Daniel's voice grew stronger. You're not just an heiress, Sarah. You're the primary shareholder. The trust was designed to keep the company stable until you were ready to take control. How much? The trust is worth $3. $2 billion. And when you turn 30 next month, it all comes under your direct control. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Sarah looked around the kitchen of the house Marcus had bought with his money, the life he'd built to keep her small and dependent. He doesn't know, she whispered. Marcus thinks I'm worth money, but he has no idea how much. No. The trust is structured to protect your privacy. Only family members and the board of trustees know the full extent. Daniel paused. Sarah, your glucose is dropping. I can see it on the app. How much insulin do you have? 1 vial. Maybe enough for 24 hours if I'm careful. Damn it. She heard papers rustling. I'm 40 minutes from you now, but the roads are getting worse. I might not make it through. The lights flickered once, twice, then came back on. The backup generator had finally kicked in. Sarah rushed to the medical fridge, still cold, the insulin still viable. She had time. Not much, but some. Sarah, listen to me carefully, Daniel said. Marcus just left you alone, pregnant and diabetic, in an ice storm because he values his mistress over your life. That's not just cruel. That's criminal negligence. And I'm going to make sure he pays for it. How? Because I'm not just your brother. I'm a doctor, and I'm a witness. I heard him admit he married you for your money. I heard him plan to divorce you and take your child. And I heard him refuse to get you life-saving medication during a medical emergency. Daniel's voice was ice and steel. Sarah, by the time this storm is over, Marcus Whitmore is going to wish he'd driven to that pharmacy. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus. She stared at it, remembering the woman she'd been an hour ago, uncertain, dependent, willing to beg for scraps of concern from a man who viewed her as a burden. That woman was gone. She let the call go to voicemail and waited. 30 seconds later, the message appeared. His voice was tight with annoyance. Sarah, the roads are worse than I thought. I'm staying at Victoria's apartment tonight. Don't wait up. And for God's sake, stop being so dramatic about the insulin situation. You're fine. She deleted the message and looked at her glucose monitor, 76. Still dropping, but slowly. The insulin she'd taken was working, buying her time. Daniel's voice came through her phone, sharp with concern. Sarah? Are you still there? I'm here. She moved to the window, watching ice coat the world in crystal. Daniel, how long until you can get here? 2 hours. Maybe 3. But Sarah, I'll be fine. I have insulin, I have the generator working, and I have something I didn't have an hour ago. What's that? Sarah Chen smiled, her hand resting on her daughter who kicked suddenly, as if sensing her mother's transformation. I have the truth. And I have a plan. Outside, the storm raged on. And inside the dark house, surrounded by the life Marcus Whitmore had built on lies and manipulation, Sarah began making phone calls that would change everything. The first was to the board of trustees at Chen Pharmaceuticals. The second was to the best divorce attorney in Connecticut. And the third was to a private investigator who specialized in documenting evidence of adultery and financial fraud. Marcus thought he'd married a weak woman he could control and discard. He'd thought wrong. The ice storm had only just begun. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Chen Pharmaceuticals Trust Division, Margaret Wu speaking. Sarah took a breath, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. Ms. Wu, this is Sarah Chen Whitmore. I need to speak with someone about my trust. The pause on the other end was profound. Ms. Chen. We've been hoping to hear from you. Your 30th birthday is in 3 weeks, and there are documents that require your signature. I need to know something first. Is my trust protected from my husband? Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Chen, perhaps this conversation would be better had with your attorney present. May I ask what's prompted this concern? Sarah looked at her glucose monitor, 74. She injected another small dose of insulin, watching the vial's contents diminish. My husband just left me alone during an ice storm. I'm 8 months pregnant with gestational diabetes, and he refused to get my insulin because his mistress needed a ride home. The silence that followed crackled with understanding. I see. Ms. Chen, I'm going to conference in Robert Chen, the chairman of your trust board. He's been your family's attorney since before you were born. Please hold. While she waited, Sarah pulled up her medical app, checking the baby's movement patterns. The kit counter showed reduced activity over the past 2 hours. Not critical yet, but concerning. She needed to keep her glucose stable, needed to keep stress levels manageable, needed to not think about Marcus with Victoria while their daughter's health hung in the balance. Sarah? The voice that came through was elderly but sharp, warm with recognition. Robert Chen. I knew your grandfather. I held you when you were born. Mr. Chen, I need help. Tell me everything. Sarah did. She told him about Marcus's conversation with Victoria, about the insulin, about the storm, about 4 years of marriage to a man who viewed her as an acquisition rather than a person. She told him about the baby growing inside her, about the glucose monitor that kept dropping despite her careful rationing, about the fear that had been her constant companion since Marcus walked out the door. When she finished, Robert Chen's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. Sarah, your grandfather built Chen Pharmaceuticals specifically to ensure no one would ever have to beg for insulin the way he did as a young immigrant. He would be devastated to know his granddaughter is rationing medication while her husband drives through a storm for his mistress. Is the trust protected? Absolutely. Your grandfather was many things, but he was not a fool. The trust is structured as a separate property entity, established before your marriage. Marcus Whitmore has zero claim to any of it. Robert paused. But Sarah, there's something you need to understand. In 3 weeks, when you turn 30, you don't just inherit the trust. You inherit control of the company. What does that mean? It means you become the majority shareholder of Chen Pharmaceuticals. It means you sit on the board of directors. It means you have the power to make decisions affecting millions of diabetics worldwide. His voice softened. Your parents were preparing you for this role before they died. They wanted you to finish medical school, understand the science behind what we do. But life had other plans. Sarah remembered her parents' gentle pressure to stay in the pre-med program, their disappointment when she'd switched to art history in her junior year. She thought they were being controlling. Now she understood they'd been preparing her for a responsibility she'd never imagined. I dropped out of medical school to marry Marcus. I know. And you can go back, or you can learn the business side, or you can hire the best people in the world to run it while you focus on raising your daughter. The point is, Sarah, you have choices. More choices than Marcus Whitmore ever wanted you to know about. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Daniel, 30 minutes out. How are your levels? Sarah glanced at the monitor, 71. Borderline. Mr. Chen, I need to manage my glucose. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow? Of course. But Sarah, one more thing. I'm sending our head of security to your location. James Rodriguez is a former FBI agent, and he's very good at documenting evidence. If your husband has truly abandoned you during a medical emergency, we need that documented. For your safety and for any legal proceedings that may follow. After hanging up, Sarah measured her insulin again. The vial was half empty now. She'd been too generous with the doses, too focused on keeping her levels stable to think about rationing for 3 days. If Daniel didn't make it through, if the storm lasted longer than predicted, if anything went wrong, the baby kicked, hard enough to take Sarah's breath away. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the shape of a tiny foot pressing outward. I know, sweet girl. I know you're scared. But we're going to be okay. I promise. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Jennifer Parsons from Parsons & Associates. Robert Chen asked me to call you. I'm a family law attorney specializing in high-net-worth divorces. I haven't decided to divorce him yet. I understand. But Mrs. Whitmore, your husband left you without necessary medication during a medical emergency. In Connecticut, that could constitute reckless endangerment. Combined with the adultery and the attempted fraud regarding your inheritance, you have grounds for a divorce that would leave him with nothing. Sarah moved to the window. Ice-coated everything now, the driveway, the trees, the elaborate landscaping Marcus had insisted on. Beautiful and deadly, like the life he'd built for her. What would the process look like? First, we document everything. Your brother is a physician, his testimony about the medical neglect will be crucial. The security specialist Mr. Chen is sending can photograph the empty medical supplies, the storm conditions, any evidence that your husband chose to leave despite knowing the danger. Second, we file for emergency custody to protect your daughter. Third, we initiate divorce proceedings with a complete asset disclosure. Marcus is worth $200 million. And you're worth $3. $2 billion. Mrs. Whitmore, in a divorce, you won't be fighting for half his assets. He'll be fighting to ensure you don't seek restitution for fraud and inducement of marriage. The concept was so foreign that Sarah almost laughed. For years of feeling small and dependent, of watching Marcus control every aspect of their life together, of believing she had no options but to endure his contempt. And all along, she'd had the power to end it. I'm turning 30 in 3 weeks. I know. Which means we need to move quickly. Once you have direct control of the trust, Marcus will realize what he's lost. Men like him become dangerous when they understand they've miscalculated. Sarah's glucose monitor buzzed, 69. Too low. She needed food, needed to stabilize, needed to think clearly. She grabbed a juice box from the emergency supplies, the one she'd stocked herself because Marcus considered preparation for emergencies to be paranoid, and drank it quickly. The sugar hit her system, and the monitor began climbing, 72, 75, 78. Better. Outside, headlights cut through the storm. Sarah's heart leapt, Daniel. But the car was wrong, a sleek black SUV with chains on the tires, nothing like her brother's modest Honda. The doorbell rang. Sarah checked the security camera Marcus had installed to monitor the house when he traveled. A tall man in his 50s stood on the porch, wearing a professional suit under a heavy winter coat. He held up identification to the camera. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm James Rodriguez. Robert Chen sent me. Sarah opened the door and a blast of frigid air nearly knocked her backward. James moved inside quickly, closing the door against the storm. Thank you for coming. The roads must be terrible. They are. I barely made it through. He pulled out a tablet and a professional camera. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to document the conditions here, your medical status, and any evidence of your husband's abandonment. Do I have your permission? Yes. For the next 20 minutes, James photographed everything. The medical fridge with its single half-empty insulin vial. The glucose monitor showing her borderline readings. The emergency supplies Sarah had assembled. The security camera footage showing Marcus leaving during the storm. The text messages, the voicemails, the call log showing her attempts to reach him. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Has your husband ever prevented you from accessing medical care before tonight? Sarah thought about the times Marcus had canceled her doctor's appointments because they conflicted with his schedule, the times he'd dismissed her concerns about the baby's movement, the times he'd made her feel guilty for needing anything at all. Not overtly. But he's made it very difficult. He controls our schedules, our car access. I have to ask permission to use the vehicle because he says I'm not a safe driver. James made notes on his tablet. And tonight, when you asked him to get your insulin, he said I was being dramatic. That I could ration what I had. That he wasn't going to risk his life for something that wasn't an emergency. But he did risk his life. He drove through the storm to reach his mistress. Sarah nodded, feeling tears threaten. She blinked them back furiously. She was done crying over Marcus Whitmore. Headlights appeared again, this time the right car. Daniel's Honda pulled into the driveway, sliding slightly on the ice before he managed to stop. Sarah rushed to the door, and her brother emerged from the car carrying what looked like a medical bag and a cooler. I brought supplies, he said, gathering her into a careful hug. Including insulin, glucose tablets, and a portable ultrasound to check on my niece. Sarah felt the tears come then, relief and gratitude and the overwhelming comfort of someone who actually cared whether she lived or died. Inside, Daniel set up his equipment with practiced efficiency. James introduced himself, and the two men exchanged a look that spoke of shared purpose. I'm going to examine you and the baby, Daniel said gently. Then we're going to make sure you're stable. Then we're going to discuss what happens next. The examination took 20 minutes. Daniel checked her blood pressure, her glucose levels, listened to the baby's heartbeat with a Doppler, and performed an ultrasound that showed their daughter moving sluggishly, conserving energy. Your levels are borderline, and the baby's showing signs of stress, Daniel said, his professional calm slipping to reveal fury underneath. Sarah, if you'd gone another few hours without proper medication, you could have gone into diabetic ketoacidosis. With pregnancy complications, that could have meant seizures, coma, or death for both of you. James photographed everything, documenting Daniel's findings with clinical precision. Marcus needs to know this, Sarah said quietly. Oh, he'll know. Daniel pulled out his phone. Because I'm calling him right now, and I'm going to explain exactly what he's done. Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to say it wasn't worth it, wanted to be the peacemaker she'd always been. But then she looked at the ultrasound image of her daughter, at the baby Marcus had endangered because his mistress was more important, and she nodded. Daniel put the phone on speaker. It rang 4 times before Marcus answered, his voice irritated. Daniel. What do you want? I want to explain the medical consequences of abandoning your pregnant, diabetic wife during an ice storm. The pause was heavy. I don't have time for your dramatics. Sarah is fine. Sarah is not fine. Her glucose levels have been borderline hypoglycemic for the past 3 hours. The baby is showing signs of fetal distress. If I hadn't made it through the storm with medical supplies, your wife and daughter could have died tonight. That's absurd. Sarah always exaggerates her medical needs. She's looking for attention. Daniel's voice went cold. Marcus, I'm a cardiologist at Mass General. I've been practicing medicine for 12 years. When I tell you that your wife's condition was life-threatening, I'm not exaggerating. I'm giving you a medical opinion that will hold up in court. Court? Marcus's tone shifted, becoming wary. What are you talking about? I'm talking about criminal negligence. I'm talking about reckless endangerment. I'm talking about abandoning your spouse during a medical emergency to spend time with your mistress. The silence that followed was absolute. I don't know what Sarah's told you. Sarah didn't tell me anything. I heard it myself. When Sarah called me earlier, the call connected but she didn't realize it. I heard your entire conversation with Victoria. I heard you admit you married my sister for her family connections. I heard you plan to divorce her and take custody of your daughter. And I heard you refuse to get her insulin because it was inconvenient. Sarah could hear voices in the background of Marcus's call. A woman's voice. Victoria, asking what was wrong. Daniel, you're misinterpreting. I'm a medical professional and a witness to a crime. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did tonight. Daniel ended the call and looked at Sarah. He's going to come back. Probably within the hour, once he realizes the implications. Good, Sarah said quietly. I want him here when I tell him about Chen Pharmaceuticals. James looked up from his tablet. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd advise waiting on that revelation. The element of surprise will be more valuable during divorce proceedings. No. Sarah stood, moving to the window where ice continued to coat the world. I've spent 4 years being surprised by Marcus, by his cruelty, by his contempt. I'm done being the one who doesn't see things coming. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. Sarah, what are you planning? She turned to face her brother, this man who'd driven through a deadly storm because she needed him, and felt something crystallize in her chest. Not anger, though there was that. Not hurt, though that was there too. Something clearer and harder and infinitely more powerful. I'm planning to show Marcus Whitmore exactly what he threw away. I'm planning to make sure he understands that the woman he married for her pharmaceutical connections is actually the woman who controls those pharmaceuticals. And I'm planning to ensure that our daughter grows up knowing her mother is strong enough to protect her from men who view people as transactions. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer Parsons. Emergency custody papers are ready for your signature. I can have them filed within the hour. Do you want to proceed? Sarah looked at the ultrasound image of her daughter, at the baby Marcus had risked for his own convenience. She thought about the woman she'd been when she married him, idealistic, trusting, willing to believe that love was enough. She thought about the woman she'd become over 4 years of emotional manipulation, small, uncertain, apologizing for her existence. Neither of those women existed anymore. The woman standing in this kitchen was someone new. Someone who knew her worth, who understood her power, who would protect her daughter with every resource at her disposal. Sarah picked up her phone and typed, proceed with everything. I want full custody, full disclosure of his assets, and a restraining order if he contests. The response came immediately, consider it done. Outside, the ice storm raged. But inside, Sarah Chen felt the first warmth she'd experienced in years. The warmth of knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Marcus Whitmore was about to learn that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't marrying a woman for her money. It was underestimating what she'd do when she finally discovered the truth. The Mercedes's headlights cut through the ice-covered darkness at 9:47 p.m., barely 2 hours after Marcus had left. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as he navigated the treacherous driveway, his expensive car sliding twice before he managed to park. He wasn't alone. Victoria emerged from the passenger seat, her blonde hair perfect despite the storm, her designer coat wrapped tight against the cold. She looked up at the house with an expression Sarah recognized, the assessment of someone calculating what something was worth. He brought her here, Sarah said quietly. To our home. Daniel moved to stand beside his sister, his jaw tight with controlled fury. That's good. James can document it. Evidence of adultery becomes much stronger when he parades his mistress through the marital residence. James was already positioning himself with his camera, professional and silent. The front door opened, and Marcus strode in with the confidence of a man who'd convinced himself he'd done nothing wrong. Victoria followed, shaking ice from her coat, her eyes immediately finding Sarah and widening slightly at the sight of her pregnant form. Sarah, we need to talk, Marcus began, his tone the one he used in boardrooms, controlled, commanding, designed to dominate. Daniel has some very wrong ideas about tonight, and I need to clear things up before this gets out of hand. Out of hand? Sarah's voice was calmer than she felt. Is that what we're calling abandoning your pregnant wife during a medical emergency? I didn't abandon you. I told you I'd be back in the morning. You had insulin, half a vial. Enough for maybe 18 hours if I ration carefully. Sarah gestured to the medical fridge. Want to see what's left after 3 hours of managing my glucose levels? Victoria shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting between Sarah and Marcus. Marcus, you said she had plenty of supplies. You said she was exaggerating. She is exaggerating, Marcus snapped. She always does this. Every minor inconvenience becomes a crisis that requires my immediate attention. I have a company to run, deals to close, responsibilities that extend beyond Sarah's constant need for validation. Daniel stepped forward, his medical bag in hand. Would you like to see the fetal monitoring strips? The ones showing your daughter in distress because her mother's glucose levels were dangerously low? Marcus's face tightened. You're her brother. You're not exactly an objective medical professional here. No, but I am a cardiologist at one of the top hospitals in the country, and my medical opinion will hold considerable weight when Sarah files for emergency custody. Daniel pulled out his tablet, showing vital signs and readings that made Victoria's face pale. Your wife was approaching diabetic crisis, Marcus. Another few hours without proper medication could have resulted in seizures, coma, or fetal death. The words hung in the air like ice crystals. Victoria took a step back, her hand reaching for the door. Marcus, you said she was fine. You said she just wanted attention. She's always fine when Daniel shows up to play hero, Marcus replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time, and seemed to notice the glucose monitor, the medical equipment Daniel had brought, the paleness of her skin. Sarah, I'm sorry if I miscalculated the severity. But you have to understand, the Tokyo merger is at a critical stage. I can't just drop everything every time you feel anxious. Anxious? Sarah's voice remained steady, but something sharp glinted beneath it. Is that what we're calling medical emergencies now? James Rodriguez stepped into view, his camera lowered but visible. Mr. Whitmore, I'm James Rodriguez, security consultant for Chen Pharmaceuticals. I've been documenting the conditions here tonight, the inadequate medical supplies, Mrs. Whitmore's glucose readings, the security footage showing you leaving during a declared ice storm emergency. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Who gave you permission to be in my home? Your wife did. This is her residence too, and she has every right to have witnesses present. James smiled slightly. Especially given that you brought your own witness. Victoria flushed. I'm not a witness. I'm Marcus's colleague who needed a ride during the storm. You're his mistress, Daniel interrupted flatly. We all know it. The text messages know it. The hotel receipts know it. The phone call I overheard tonight where Marcus told you he married Sarah for her pharmaceutical connections knows it. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marcus's face went through several expressions, shock, anger, calculation, before settling on defensive fury. You had no right to listen to a private conversation. Sarah called me. The call connected. I heard everything you said to Victoria about marrying my sister for access to our family's business connections. Daniel's voice was ice. I heard you call her a needy burden. I heard you plan to divorce her and take custody of your daughter. And I heard you laugh about how Sarah has no idea she's sitting on a fortune. Victoria turned to Marcus slowly. What fortune? Marcus's jaw worked, but no words came out. Sarah felt something shift inside her, the final piece of uncertainty dissolving. He didn't tell you? That's interesting. I wonder why. Sarah, this isn't the time, Marcus began. No, I think it's exactly the time. Sarah moved to the kitchen table, lowering herself into a chair with the careful movements of late pregnancy. Victoria, did Marcus tell you why he married me? The real reason? Sarah, don't, Marcus warned, and there was genuine alarm in his voice now. He married me because my grandfather was David Chen, founder of Chen Pharmaceuticals. Marcus thought that marrying into the family would give him business connections, maybe even a position on the board. Sarah looked at Victoria's confused expression. What he didn't know is exactly how much Chen Pharmaceuticals is worth. Sarah, Marcus's voice was sharp with warning. Or that my parents left everything in trust until I turned 30. Sarah continued as if he hadn't spoken. Or that my 30th birthday is in 3 weeks. Victoria's eyes widened with understanding. How much is everything? The trust is valued at $3. $2 billion, Daniel said with satisfaction. Sarah will inherit direct control of 40% of North American insulin production. She'll become one of the wealthiest women in the pharmaceutical industry. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at Marcus with an expression of dawning horror. You married a billionaire heiress and didn't tell me? She's not a billionaire yet, Marcus said quickly, his corporate strategist brain already spinning. The trust doesn't transfer until her birthday. Until then, she has no direct access, but I do have access to the trustees, Sarah interrupted quietly. I spoke with Robert Chen tonight. He was my grandfather's closest friend and the chairman of my trust board. He was very interested to hear about my current situation. Marcus's face drained of color. What did you tell him? The truth. That my husband left me without necessary medication during a medical emergency. That he's been having an affair with his employee. That he married me under false pretenses with plans to divorce me and seek custody of our child. Sarah's hand moved to her belly. Robert was very concerned about the welfare of David Chen's great-granddaughter. Sarah, you don't understand what you're doing, I understand perfectly. Sarah met his eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, she didn't look away first. I understand that you married me for money and access. I understand that you've spent our entire marriage making me feel small and worthless while planning to abandon me once I'd served your purpose. And I understand that the biggest mistake you've made isn't the affair, Marcus. It's underestimating me. Victoria grabbed her purse, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. You let me risk everything, my reputation, my job, my future, for a man who was using me to get to his wife's billions? Victoria, wait, Marcus reached for her, but she jerked away. Don't touch me. You said she was nobody. You said you were trading up from a middle-class wife who couldn't appreciate your ambition. Victoria's voice climbed toward hysteria. You made me the other woman in a marriage to one of the richest women in America. She wasn't rich when I married her. But she is now. Or will be in 3 weeks. Victoria turned to Sarah, and there was something almost like respect in her expression. I'm sorry. I genuinely didn't know. He told me you were just a burden, Sarah finished. I know. I heard him say it. Victoria left without another word, the door slamming behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Marcus stood frozen, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled panic. Sarah, I know how this looks. But we can work through this. We have a daughter on the way. We have a life together, we have nothing together, Sarah said quietly. We never did. You built a lie and I lived in it, but tonight, the lie ended. I'm your husband. I have rights, and I'm about to be worth $3. $2 billion. I have lawyers. Sarah gestured to James, who held up his tablet showing page after page of documented evidence. And I have witnesses who heard you admit to fraud in the inducement of marriage. Marcus's corporate mind was clearly racing, searching for leverage, for control, for any advantage. The baby. I'm her father. You can't cut me out of her life. No, but I can ensure your access is supervised. I can make sure you never have the opportunity to endanger her the way you endangered me tonight. Sarah's voice remained calm, but beneath it was steel that Marcus was hearing for the first time. Daniel has documented the medical crisis you caused. James has documented the abandonment. And I have recordings of you planning to take custody as part of your scheme to access my trust. Recordings? Marcus's face went white. Daniel held up his phone. The call I overheard? I recorded it. All of it. You admitting you married Sarah for her pharmaceutical connections. You discussing divorce strategy with Victoria. You calling your pregnant wife a burden. He smiled without humor. It's amazing what's admissible in family court proceedings. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Marcus sank into a chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking rumpled, his commanding presence deflating like a punctured tire. What do you want? I want a divorce, Sarah said simply. I want full custody with supervised visitation. I want you out of this house tonight. And I want you to understand that the woman you married for her family connections is about to become powerful enough to destroy your entire company with a single phone call. You wouldn't I? Sarah tilted her head, studying the man she'd loved for 4 years. Marcus, you refused to get me insulin during a medical emergency because your mistress was more important. You planned to take my daughter from me. You called me worthless while plotting to steal my inheritance. What exactly makes you think I have any reason to show you mercy? Marcus looked around the kitchen, at Daniel's implacable fury, at James's professional documentation, at the evidence of his own cruelty laid out in medical readings and recorded conversations. Sarah, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Think about our daughter. She deserves a father who values her mother's life, Daniel interrupted. Which you clearly don't. A phone rang, sharp in the tense silence. James answered it, listened briefly, then looked at Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, Jennifer Parsons is outside. She has emergency custody papers ready for your signature. What? Marcus stood abruptly. You can't file for custody. I'm her father. You're a father who endangered both mother and child, Daniel said flatly. Trust me, Marcus. Any family court judge is going to take that very seriously. The doorbell rang. James opened it, and a woman in her 50s entered, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of professional competence. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jennifer Parsons. We spoke earlier. I have the emergency custody petition ready, along with a temporary restraining order preventing your husband from returning to the marital residence. Marcus's voice rose. You can't kick me out of my own house. It's not your house, Jennifer said calmly, pulling documents from her briefcase. The deed is in both names, making it marital property. During a separation, the court typically awards residence to the spouse who has greater need. Your pregnant, diabetic wife has greater need. This is insane. Sarah, you can't just. Sarah's glucose monitor buzzed. She glanced down, 65. Too low again. The stress of the confrontation was affecting her levels, burning through glucose faster than her body could regulate it. Daniel was beside her immediately, checking the reading, preparing another dose of insulin. Marcus, you need to leave. Now. My sister's health is more important than your wounded ego. Marcus stared at Sarah, and for a moment, something flickered across his face that might have been genuine regret. But then his jaw set with the stubborn pride she knew too well. Fine. I'll leave. But Sarah, this isn't over. You don't get to destroy my life because you're angry about Victoria. I'm not angry about Victoria, Sarah said quietly, accepting the glucose tablets Daniel handed her. I'm angry that you valued your affair more than your daughter's life. I'm angry that you married me for money while making me feel worthless. And I'm angry that it took me 4 years to see what my brother saw from the beginning, that you're incapable of loving anyone but yourself. Marcus grabbed his coat, his movements jerky with suppressed rage. You'll regret this. When you're sitting alone in this house with a screaming baby and no one to help you, she won't be alone, Daniel interrupted. She'll have family who actually care about her. Something you've never understood. After Marcus left, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the storm still raging outside. Sarah signed the custody papers with shaking hands, her glucose levels slowly stabilizing as Daniel monitored her carefully. Jennifer Parsons packed the signed documents efficiently. These will be filed first thing tomorrow morning. Until then, the restraining order is in effect. If Marcus attempts to return or contact you, call the police immediately. What happens next? Sarah asked. Discovery. We'll request full disclosure of his assets, bank records, business dealings. We'll depose Victoria to establish the timeline of the affair. And we'll prepare for custody hearings where Daniel's medical testimony will be crucial. Jennifer's smile was sharp. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband made a critical error tonight. He gave us everything we need to ensure you get full custody and a favorable divorce settlement. After Jennifer left, Sarah sat at the kitchen table while Daniel checked her vitals one more time. James had retreated to give them privacy, but she could hear him on the phone in the next room, reporting to Robert Chen about the night's events. How are you really doing? Daniel asked gently. Sarah thought about the question. Her glucose levels were stabilizing. The baby had started moving more regularly, reassured by her mother's steady heartbeat. The insulin Daniel had brought would last for weeks. And Marcus was gone. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm about to be a single mother. And I'm apparently about to inherit billions of dollars and a pharmaceutical empire I know nothing about. You don't have to do it alone. Daniel squeezed her hand. I'm taking a leave of absence from the hospital. I'm staying here until the baby is born, and I'm going to make sure you and my niece are safe. You can't just leave your job. I'm a cardiologist, Sarah. I save lives. And right now, the 2 lives that matter most to me are yours and your daughter's. He smiled. Besides, I've always wanted to learn about pharmaceutical management. I hear there's about to be an opening on the Chen Pharmaceuticals Board of Trustees. Sarah felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the tears she'd cried over Marcus's cruelty. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of understanding that she'd never been as alone as Marcus had made her feel. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert Chen. The board convened an emergency meeting tonight. We're accelerating your trust transfer. You'll have full access to resources immediately for legal protection and medical care. Your grandfather would be proud of your strength. Another text, this one from Margaret Wu. Chen Pharmaceuticals has a full medical team on standby. If you go into labor, you'll have the best obstetricians in the country attending you. Your family, Sarah. We protect family. Sarah looked around the kitchen of the house Marcus had bought to isolate her, to keep her dependent, to make her feel small. Tomorrow, she'd start looking for a new place. Somewhere in Boston, near Daniel and the hospital. Somewhere she could raise her daughter surrounded by people who valued her. But tonight, she'd survived. She'd stood up to Marcus. She'd learned the truth about her inheritance. And she'd taken the first steps toward reclaiming the life he'd tried to steal from her. Outside, the ice storm continued to rage. But inside, Sarah Chen felt the warmth of knowing exactly who she was. Not Marcus Whitmore's discarded wife. Not a burden. Not worthless. She was Sarah Chen, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, soon to be mother of a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, and a woman who had finally discovered that the greatest power wasn't in billions of dollars. It was in refusing to be diminished by men who couldn't see her value. Marcus Whitmore had made his choice when he drove away into the storm. Now Sarah was making hers. And her choice would change everything. The emergency board meeting of Chen Pharmaceuticals took place 3 days after the ice storm, in a conference room 70 stories above Boston. Sarah sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, 8 months pregnant and more nervous than she'd ever been in her life. Around the table sat 12 of the most powerful people in the pharmaceutical industry. Robert Chen, white-haired and sharp-eyed at 78. Margaret Wu, the CFO who'd managed the trust for 20 years. Dr. James Patterson, Chief of Research and Development. And 9 others whose combined experience represented centuries of pharmaceutical expertise. They were looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to barely concealed skepticism. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Chen began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in boardrooms since before Sarah was born. We've convened this emergency session to address the situation with our primary shareholder and to accelerate certain provisions of the trust established by David Chen. He gestured to Sarah. Sarah Chen Whitmore is 3 weeks away from her 30th birthday, at which point she would normally assume full control of her inheritance. However, given recent events and credible threats to her safety and that of her unborn child, I'm recommending we invoke the emergency transfer clause. Walk us through the situation, said Dr. Patterson, a black man in his 60s whose insulin research had saved millions of lives. What exactly constitutes the threat? Daniel, sitting beside Sarah as her medical advocate, opened his laptop. 3 nights ago, during a declared state of emergency ice storm, Sarah's husband, Marcus Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies, refused to obtain necessary insulin for his diabetic, 8 months pregnant wife. He instead chose to drive through dangerous conditions to reach his mistress. He pulled up the medical documentation. Sarah's glucose levels dropped to crisis levels. The fetus showed signs of distress. If I hadn't reached her with emergency supplies, we could have been looking at diabetic ketoacidosis, seizures, premature labor, or fetal death. The board members' expressions hardened. Margaret Wu spoke next. Additionally, we have recorded evidence that Mr. Whitmore married Sarah specifically to gain access to Chen Pharmaceuticals. He has stated his intention to divorce her and seek custody of their child as leverage to influence the trust. Do we have legal protection against that? Asked Linda Torres, the head of operations. Completely, Jennifer Parsons replied from her position at the end of the table. The trust is separate property, established before the marriage. Mr. Whitmore has zero claim to any of it. But his attempted fraud and endangerment of Sarah and her child constitute grounds for criminal charges in addition to the divorce proceedings. Robert Chen looked around the table. The question before us is simple: do we wait 3 weeks for Sarah's birthday, during which time Marcus Whitmore may attempt further manipulation or harm? Or do we invoke the emergency transfer, giving Sarah immediate access to resources and legal protection? I vote for immediate transfer, Dr. Patterson said without hesitation. David Chen built this company to save lives. His granddaughter and great-granddaughter shouldn't have to wait for protection. The vote was unanimous. Robert slid a document across the table to Sarah. Effective immediately, you have full access to the trust. $3. $2 billion in assets. Controlling interest in Chen Pharmaceuticals. And the full resources of this board to help you navigate both your divorce and your new responsibilities. Sarah stared at the paper, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the pen. This was real. This was happening. She was about to become one of the most powerful women in the pharmaceutical industry. Sarah, Margaret Wu said gently. Before you sign, I want you to understand what this means. You won't just be wealthy. You'll be responsible. 40 million diabetics depend on our insulin production. Thousands of employees depend on our decisions. Your grandfather built this company with the belief that life-saving medication should be accessible to everyone who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay. That's why he came to America, Sarah said quietly, remembering stories from her childhood. Because in his village in China, people died from diabetes because they couldn't afford treatment. Exactly. Robert's eyes softened. He wanted you to understand that legacy before taking control. Your parents were preparing you for this, teaching you about medicine and business and responsibility. When they died, we decided to wait until you were 30, hoping you'd find your way back to that understanding. Sarah thought about the past 4 years with Marcus, how she'd abandoned medical school, abandoned her family's legacy, abandoned herself to become what he wanted. And she thought about her daughter, growing inside her, who would inherit this company someday. I want to go back to school, she said suddenly. Not medical school, I don't want to practice medicine. But I want to understand pharmaceutical research, drug development, the business side of what we do. I want to earn the right to sit at this table, not just inherit it. The board members exchanged glances, and Sarah saw approval in their expressions. We were hoping you'd say that, Dr. Patterson said with a smile. We've already put together a comprehensive training program. You'll work with every division, learn from the best people in the industry, and by the time your daughter is old enough for preschool, you'll be ready to run this company. Sarah signed the document, her signature shaky but determined. The moment the pen left the paper, she felt something shift. Not just legally, but internally. She wasn't just Sarah Chen anymore. She was Sarah Chen, majority shareholder of Chen Pharmaceuticals. A woman with the power to change lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you're so smart, hiding behind your family's money. But I know things about Chen Pharmaceuticals that could destroy your precious company. We need to talk. Marcus Sarah showed the message to Robert, who read it with grim satisfaction. He's desperate. Good. Desperate men make mistakes. What could he possibly know that would hurt us? Sarah asked. Nothing real, Margaret Wu replied. But he'll try to manufacture scandals, spread rumors, use his tech industry connections to damage our reputation. It's what men like him do when they lose control. Jennifer Parsons made a note on her tablet. This message constitutes harassment and violates the restraining order. I'm forwarding it to the police. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering logistics, legal strategy, and the transition plan. By the time they finished, Sarah's back was aching and the baby was kicking restlessly, but she felt more energized than she had in years. As the board members filed out, Dr. Patterson paused beside her chair. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Sarah. Not because you're taking control of his company, but because you're doing it to protect your daughter. That's what he always said, family first, business second, and never forget why we're doing this. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the boardroom, looking out at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, Marcus was plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably regretting every choice that had led her to become the mistress of a man who'd married for money. And somewhere out there, the life Sarah had tried to build with Marcus was dissolving like ice in the sun. Her phone rang. The screen showed Marcus's office number. She almost didn't answer. But then she thought about the recording Daniel had made, about the documentation James had compiled, about the restraining order Marcus had just violated. Every interaction was evidence. Every contact was another nail in his legal coffin. Sarah. His voice was controlled, corporate, the tone he used when negotiating deals. We need to talk about this situation rationally. You violated the restraining order by texting me. I'm your husband. I have the right to communicate with you about our child. You have supervised visitation rights pending the custody hearing. Communication goes through our attorneys. Sarah kept her voice level, channeling the boardroom composure she'd just witnessed. Is there anything else? Sarah, I know you're angry. I know I made mistakes. But this divorce, the custody battle, getting your family involved, you're making decisions out of emotion instead of logic. Actually, I'm making decisions based on the fact that you endangered our daughter's life. That's not fair. I didn't know the situation was that serious. You knew I was diabetic. You knew I was pregnant. You knew there was an ice storm. And you chose your mistress over your wife's medical emergency. Sarah felt the baby kick, as if agreeing with her mother's assessment. That's not a mistake, Marcus. That's a choice. The silence on the other end was heavy. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming harder. I did some research on Chen Pharmaceuticals. Interesting company. Very focused on affordable insulin, on pricing structures that prioritize access over profit. That was my grandfather's vision. Yes, well, your grandfather's vision might not align with modern business realities. I've been talking to some investors who think Chen Pharmaceuticals is undervalued, underutilized. The company could be worth twice as much with the right pricing strategy. Sarah's stomach clenched. What are you saying? I'm saying that I have friends in the pharmaceutical industry. Friends who would be very interested in weakening Chen Pharmaceuticals' market position. Friends who could make things very difficult for a company led by an inexperienced 30-year-old who knows nothing about business. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Marcus's voice softened, becoming almost gentle. Sarah, I don't want to fight you. I don't want to hurt your family's company. But if you insist on this divorce, on taking my daughter away from me, on humiliating me publicly, I'll have no choice but to protect my interests. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. By destroying a company that provides life-saving medication to millions of people? By using every resource at my disposal. Just like you're doing. He paused. We could still work this out, Sarah. Drop the divorce proceedings. Give me shared custody. Let me be part of our daughter's life without lawyers and court battles. And I'll leave Chen Pharmaceuticals alone. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it wasn't so dangerous. You're trying to blackmail me into staying married to you. I'm trying to protect our family. There's a difference. Sarah thought about the board meeting, about the 12 people who'd unanimously voted to protect her. About her grandfather's legacy of putting patients before profits. About the daughter growing inside her who deserved better than a father who used threats to get what he wanted. No, Marcus. There's no difference at all. You're showing me exactly who you are, a man who would hurt millions of people to maintain control over one woman. She felt something crystallize in her chest, cold and clear and unbreakable. But here's what you don't understand. I'm not alone anymore. I have resources you can't imagine, legal protection you can't break, and a family legacy I will protect with everything I have. Sarah, file whatever lawsuits you want. Spread whatever rumors you can. Try to damage Chen Pharmaceuticals if that makes you feel powerful. Sarah stood, moving to the window where the city spread out beneath her. But know this, every action you take will be documented, every threat will be recorded, and every attempt to hurt my family's company will only strengthen my case for full custody. You're making a mistake. No, Marcus. The only mistake I made was believing you when you said you loved me. Sarah ended the call and immediately forwarded the recording to Jennifer Parsons. The response came within seconds. Perfect. He just confessed to planning corporate sabotage and attempted extortion. I'm adding this to the custody filing. Daniel appeared in the doorway, carrying takeout bags that smelled like Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant. I saw the board members leaving. How did it go? I'm officially a billionaire. Sarah turned from the window, feeling the weight and power of those words. And Marcus just threatened to destroy Chen Pharmaceuticals if I don't drop the divorce. Daniel set down the food, his expression darkening. He actually said that? Not in those exact words. But he made it clear he has friends in the pharmaceutical industry who could make things difficult for us. Sarah sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Daniel, what if he can actually hurt the company? What if his threats aren't empty? Then we'll deal with it. Daniel opened the food containers, the spicy aroma of pad thai filling the room. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. Men like Marcus thrive on making women doubt themselves. He wants you to believe he has power he doesn't actually have. It's psychological warfare. But he does have connections. His company works with pharmaceutical suppliers, and your company supplies 40% of North American insulin. Who do you think has more leverage? Daniel handed her a plate. Eat. You need to keep your glucose stable, and stress isn't helping. Sarah picked at the noodles, her mind racing. I just keep thinking about all the patients who depend on our insulin. What if Marcus does something that disrupts supply chains or damages our reputation? People could die. That's why we're going to be smart about this. Daniel pulled out his tablet, showing her a document. I've been talking to the board's legal team. They're preparing a comprehensive defense strategy, not just for the divorce, but for any corporate attacks Marcus might attempt. The document outlined potential vulnerabilities, preemptive measures, and response protocols for everything from hostile takeover attempts to media smear campaigns. It was thorough, professional, and slightly terrifying in its implications. This is really happening, Sarah whispered. I'm really going to war with my husband. You're protecting yourself and your daughter from a man who proved he values control over your life. Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, 3 days ago, he left you without insulin during a medical emergency. That's not a marriage. That's captivity with a ring. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Robert Chen. Margaret just informed me of Marcus's call. We're convening an emergency PR strategy session tomorrow morning. Also, I've taken the liberty of assigning you a security detail. James Rodriguez will coordinate 24/7 protection for you and the baby." Sarah looked up at Daniel. "They're assigning me bodyguards." "Good. Marcus is getting desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." Daniel's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen before answering. "Dr. Morrison speaking." Sarah watched her brother's expression change from professional to alarmed in the space of 3 seconds. "When?" he asked sharply. "What were the symptoms?" A pause. "No, don't wait. Get her to Mass General immediately. I'll meet you there." He hung up and grabbed his medical bag. That was Victoria. "She's having severe abdominal pain and vaginal bleeding." "Victoria?" Sarah's mind struggled to catch up. "Why is she calling you?" "Because she's 12 weeks pregnant with Marcus's baby, and she's terrified." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. "She's pregnant?" "She just found out 3 days ago. Took a test after Marcus told her about your inheritance, probably hoping it would give her leverage." Daniel was already heading for the door. "But she's having complications, and she's scared. She asked me to help her because, and I quote, I'm the only doctor who knows the whole terrible situation." "Daniel, you can't treat her. She's a pregnant woman in medical distress. That's all that matters right now." He paused at the door. "Sarah, I know this is complicated. But I took an oath. I'll call you as soon as I know more." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the boardroom, processing the revelation. Victoria was pregnant. Marcus had gotten both of them pregnant. The man who'd endangered Sarah by refusing to get her insulin had created another life that was now in danger. The irony was so sharp it actually hurt. Her phone rang again. "Marcus." Against every instinct, Sarah answered. "What do you want?" "Victoria called me. She's bleeding. She might be losing the baby." His voice was raw with panic in a way Sarah had never heard. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve to ask, but Daniel is with her. Can you find out what's happening?" Sarah felt a wave of emotions so complex she couldn't name them all. Anger. Pity. Vindication. Sorrow. The woman who'd helped destroy her marriage was potentially losing her baby, and the man who'd risked Sarah's daughter's life was now begging for information about the other woman's pregnancy. "Daniel will do everything he can to help her," Sarah said quietly. "He's a good doctor. She's in the best hands. I should be there. But she won't see me. She won't take my calls." Marcus's voice cracked. "She says it's my fault, the stress of finding out about your money, the guilt of the affair. She says I did this." "Did you?" Sarah asked softly. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. "I don't know. Maybe. Everything I touch turns to ashes, doesn't it?" "Marcus, I'm losing everything, Sarah. My marriage, my daughter, Victoria, her baby. And it's all because I couldn't just..." He stopped, and Sarah heard something that sounded like a sob. "I'm sorry. I know that's worthless now, but I'm sorry." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the baby move inside her. This complicated, messy life she'd created with a man who'd never truly loved her. "I hope Victoria and the baby are okay. I genuinely do. But Marcus, this doesn't change anything between us." "I know." His voice was hollow. "I know." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness of the boardroom, her hand on her belly where their daughter was kicking with increasing insistence. Outside the windows, Boston's lights were beginning to twinkle like stars. Her phone buzzed with updates. James Rodriguez confirming the security detail. Jennifer Parsons outlining the next steps in the custody battle. Margaret Wu sending a detailed agenda for tomorrow's strategy meeting. And then, 45 minutes later, Daniel, "Victoria is stable. Threatened miscarriage but we caught it in time. She's being admitted for observation. Marcus showed up but she won't see him. She keeps saying she ruined her life for a man who was using her. Sarah felt something unexpected, compassion. Not forgiveness. Victoria had made her choices. But compassion for a woman who'd been used by the same man who'd used Sarah, who was learning the hard way that Marcus Whitmore only valued people for what they could give him. She texted back, "Tell her I'm glad she and the baby are okay. And that she deserves better than Marcus. We both do." As Sarah left the boardroom and headed for the elevator, she caught sight of herself in the reflective surface of the glass doors. 8 months pregnant, wearing an expensive maternity dress the board had provided, carrying herself with a confidence that was new and still slightly uncomfortable. She didn't look like Marcus Whitmore's abandoned wife anymore. She looked like Sarah Chen, pharmaceutical heiress. Soon-to-be mother. And a woman who was finally understanding what her grandfather had built and why it mattered. Tomorrow, she'd face the media strategy session. Next week, the custody hearing. In 3 weeks, her 30th birthday and the official transfer of power. But tonight, she was going home to the temporary apartment the board had arranged in Boston, near Daniel, in the hospital. She was going to take a warm bath, monitor her glucose levels, and rest. Because the war with Marcus Whitmore was just beginning. And Sarah Chen intended to win.